there, it's Kevin with RogueDeckBuilder.com here with the top 10 cards that I am looking forward to brewing with from Core 2020. Now, this list is not the most competitive list. It's not the best cards out of Core 2020. This is a tradition of mine just to give my top 10 favorite cards that I'm looking forward to brew with from Core 2020. Now, I know, I say this every time I make one of these lists. I'm going to be bringing back brews. This time I mean it. Summer is going to be a little bit busy, but I'm going to try to have at least one brew every Tuesday on this channel, and I still haven't given up on the second channel where I want to have actually daily brews, recruiting other brewers from various facets of life to post on that channel, but that is going to be after the summer's over, probably after rotation. We're going to hit that hard. Hoping that the next set or the next format that they've announced for Arena, the post-rotation format, kind of a modern light, will take off in paper as well, and we'll be able to make some good content for that. So be looking forward to that. Anyway, let's get on to the top 10 list of cards that I am looking forward to brew with from Core 2020. So first of all, let's start off with an honorable mention. I think this one has to be mentioned because you know I love a Johnny's Pridemate. You know I love Soul Sisters. It's the deck that got me to a pro tour, and there is an Johnny Pridemate type card in the format called Bloodthirsty Aerialist. This is a 2/3 flying, 1 black vampire rogue, so it's a rogue too, so plus there. And whenever you gain life, you put a +1 counter on Bloodthirsty Aerialist. So I think this card actually has potential. There are a lot of black cards that actually do gain life. There is Aristocrats that now has 2 things that can drain and gain you, or make your opponent lose life and gain life, with a card whenever a card dies, you gain a life, and now there's one that's coming out that whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, you also gain a life. So I think that could go in that deck. It curves very well with both of those, and in an Aristocrats type strategy, or just a kind of go wide gain life type deck, I think this is a perfect slot for standard. Probably not playable in modern, as 3 versus 2 is just mountains more mana. However, in standard, I think this is going to be something that can easily curve, get out to be a 3/4 quite easily, and then become bigger, and be a very reasonable threat. Alrighty, so let's get on to the top 10 list. On to my number 10 is going to be Omnath, Locus of the Royal. I think this is a very interesting mechanic on Core 2020 with elemental matters. This is going to make a fun commander for sure, but I think that this is actually standard playable. We have ways to ramp this out with the different elves like Incubation and the other hexproof elf that can get this out on turn number 3. When Omnath enters the battlefield, it deals damage to any target equal number of elementals you control. And then whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you put a +1 counter on target elemental you control. If you control 8 or more lands, you draw a card. So there are a lot of ways to put out elemental tokens in standard. There's usually always a Chandra that puts out elementals, and so tokens-wise, each set's going to have it. Going back into even like modern, there are tons of elementals that come out early, and Omnath is a fun little card that can be flickered and just start machine gunning down targets. I think that drawing a card when we have 8 or more lands makes an interesting ramp aspect to it, and the +1 counters on a target element you control is also pretty good with the landfall type ability. So again, I think this card has a lot going for it for 4 mana with a 3/3 body, and it'll be interesting to see what I can come up with this particular card. All right, on to my number 9. This is Yarick the Desecrated. This card is a 3/5 Death Touch lifelink for 5 mana in the Sultai colors. And if a permanent entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control, that ability is triggered twice. So it's a Panharmonicon on a creature. And it's also a pretty decent body with Death Touch lifelink. It survives Lava Coil, which I think is going to be huge post-rotation. And it is going to be able to be a roadblock, at least trade with everything in the format, as well as the lifelink is going to be very valuable with mono red and mono white still surviving post-rotation. And then having that ability to be able to trigger twice for all of your cards. There are a lot of cards that it would be awesome with in standard right now. Post-rotation, we're losing like Jadelight Ranger and Ravenous Chupacabra and Hostage Taker. But still, I think that there will be plenty of ETB effects to work with Yarick. It's going to slot definitely in that Command the Dreadhorde deck right now. I could see a Ravenous Chupacabra slash the Hostage Taker, Jadelight Ranger, those type of things still working until rotation with Yarick at the kind of the high-end curve. This could replace some of the traditional Planeswalkers we see in that slot, and I think it's definitely powerful enough for that deck. So speaking of all the enter the battlefield effects too after the Command the Dreadhorde, that gets kind of interesting too. It does cost you a lot of life to reanimate it, but I mean you're getting all those triggers twice. Most of the Command the Dreadhorde is enter the battlefield effects. So yeah, I think that's where it fits. All right, on to my number 8. This is Mystic Forge. This card seems pretty broken. It seems very busted after reading it over again. This is 4 mana, which allows you to look at the top card of your library, and then you can cast the top card of your library if it's an artifact card or a colorless non-land card. And then you can pay 1 life to exile top card of your library by tapping it. So this card seems pretty busted with Paradox Engine and Commander, with being able to exile any card that is not an artifact. So if you're looking at either an Oathbreaker with Ugin or Karn, or if you're looking at Commander with Karns or Koziliks or those type of decks, colorless decks, this Mystic Forge with Paradox Engine or other ways to untap this artifact seems pretty broken to then just go infinite, being able to cast cards off to the top of the library. You still have to pay for their mana cost, but with Paradox Engine, untapping your rocks seems very, very powerful. In Constructed, this also seems pretty busted in decks that can utilize anything that ramps up mana, like the Mox Amber type cards. And I'm sure there will be rock decks that can definitely make use of Mystic Forge. It's going to be very interesting in the format that's Bridges, Standard, and Modern that's coming out as Kaladesh just rotated. I don't know if that's going to be legal or not, or if you even go back even further, there are other artifact sets or artifact matters in many of those sets that came out, and we had colorless matters in sets that came out prior to that. So I think this card is insanely powerful and is just begging to be broken in the right shell. All right, so moving on to the next card. This is Kaikar Wind's Fury. Everyone is talking about this one for EDH, but I'm looking at this in like a modern or a standard brew. It seems very powerful in feather decks. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you create a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying, and then you can sacrifice a spirit to add red to your mana pool. So it's a renewable engine by creating 1/1 spirit creature tokens, as well as having the ability to sacrifice them for mana. So all of your spells become pseudo ramp for the next turn or go wide. So I think this card is very, very decent. 3/3 body is a little bit weak for a 4 mana with 3 different colors. Dies a lightning strike. Which that one does rotate, but there's plenty of skewers that still stay in the format, plenty of other ways to deal, lava coil, whatnot. But anyway, I think that if this card lasts 1 turn, even in standard, you can cast a ton of spells and go wide with this, and then have something, sacrificing a spirit to add red to ramp into something huge the next turn seems pretty decent as well. So there are plenty of synergies right now in standard. I'm not even going to get into modern with Manamorphose and many other cards in the storm type shell that can just break this. Even Jeskai Ascendancy seems like it might work with Kaikar. But Commander, of course, this can make a very, very fun Commander. A lot of cards have already spiked up in price for Kaikar, so I'm assuming this can be a very, very popular card. All right, speaking of the elementals, let's go on to my number 6, which is the Risen Reef. This one seems like a pretty good card for 3 mana. It's a 1/1. Whenever Risen Reef or another elemental enters the battlefield under your control, look at the top card of your library. If it's land, you may put that card onto the battlefield tapped. If you don't put that card onto the battlefield, put it into your hand. So it's got the Coiling Oracle ability every time an elemental comes into play. Like I said before, there are tons of cards in the history of Magic that put out elemental tokens, especially in red. If you're into the Teamer with Chandras, this can ramp you a lot of lands off the top of your library or draw a lot of cards. So we do have a Chandra right now that puts in elementals. We have a few other cards that put in elementals. I'm assuming the next sets will probably get a few. There are plenty in the core 2020 that put out elementals, and this just screams just a value city based card. It's 3 mana for a 1/1 that draws a card, but it kind of reminds you of, I guess that's not the 3/2 body or adding the energy like the Rogue Refiner that ended up having to get banned in standard, but it's playing a very similar slot. And if this card isn't taken care of, if you do have like a good curved elemental, this is going to get you a ton of card advantage throughout the game. All right, on to my number 5. Speaking of the card that gains you life every time a creature comes into play, this is Corpse Knight. So whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent loses 1 life. Okay, this one actually doesn't gain you life. I read it wrong. I thought it drained. So each opponent loses 1 life. So it doesn't work in a shell that's trying to gain life, but I think Corpse Knight pairs very well. In the Aristocrats, it says another creature, it doesn't say non-token creature. So his Tribunalio right now is on curve with Corpse Knight, and this one also is pretty good with the Hero Precinct 1. So Hero Precinct 1 and a bunch of multicolored spells is going to drain every time one of those tokens comes into play. If you go into like an Abzan list with you have the Finale of Glory, or you have the Convoke card that puts in a bunch of tokens. You have Trostani. I think that's a pretty good shell with Corpse Knight, being able to drain. One of the problems with Sultai tokens right now is they usually have to wait like a turn to swing in, and you can't get, after board wipes and other things, sometimes you don't get any value out of your cards. The Corpse Knights do allow you to at least get those value. That also is very interesting with Corpse Knight and like Command the Dreadhorde decks. If you Command the Dreadhorde with Corpse Knight and a ton of cards, even if they're one drops or cards that put out tokens, it definitely could be lethal with a couple of these in. Or if you have other cards that then sacrifice creatures when they come into play, you can then pair it with the other sacrifice, like the Judiths and the, I can't think of the card right now, but the Orzhov card that whenever a creature dies, your opponents lose a life and you gain a life. I think that's a very legitimate deck. The majority of those cards survive post-rotation. And yeah, Hero Precinct 1 survives. I think the shell is there. It also has two tribes that are very relevant in Standard right now with Zombie and Knight. Both of those do have tribes. One's going to be rotating, but the other Zombie looks like it might be lasting post-rotation. All right, on to my number 4. This is Leyline of Abundance. People have already come up with turn 2 combos with Leyline of Abundance, but I do think I like this card in Standard. I've been playing an Elf Ball type strategy, and I think this might push the Elf Ball into competition. If it's in your opening hand, you can have Leyline enter into the battlefield before your first turn starts. Whenever you tap a creature for mana, add an additional green. So whenever you tap a creature for mana, add an additional green to your mana pool. And then for 8 mana, you can put a +1 counter on each creature you control. So it turns your Llanowar Elves into Findoran Elders, for example, or just makes all of your other creatures that do tap for your Paradise Druids and your Incubation Druids immediately tap for 2. So in the manipulation decks, the Bant Manipulation or the Simic Manipulation, this could be a good tech. It also does have kind of that finisher built into it with the 8 mana. That basically means it's 4 mana dorks to put a +1 counter on each creature. I've liked cards like Gavney Township in the past. It's kind of cool with the synergy with Incubation Druid that then you get a +1 counter on the Incubation Druid to then tap for more mana. I don't know, it seems pretty good. Also, what's really cool about Leyline Abundance is Yang, the Planeswalker out of War of the Spark, Yang Yang Yu, I think is the one with the dog, where creatures can tap for mana if they have a +1 counter on it. So this is a way to get +1 counters on creatures. And with a proliferate strategy that just came out with War of the Spark, I don't know, seems pretty decent. All right, on to my number 3. My number 3 is another green card. This is Season of Growth. This is 2 mana. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, you scry 1. And then whenever you cast a spell that targets a creature you control, draw a card. So Ixalan had a very similar card that didn't quite get there. Shaper's Sanctuary, whenever your creatures were targeted by an opponent, you got to draw a card. So this one's cool because it's mirrored. Whenever you cast a spell that targets a creature you control, you draw a card. So actually it's not mirrored. So it doesn't trigger off your opponent. But when you cast it, it's a lot easier to control than what your opponents cast a spell that targets a creature you control. So I think in like a heroic type shell, you can go nuts with this particular card. Speaking of Elf Ball type strategies, I think Season of Growth works quite well with Marwyn. So you can cast a spell that untaps Marwyn to then draw a card, then tap for mana, and then cast another spell that untaps it. Then it can hopefully get bigger and bigger if you're casting elves in with this. If you have other ways, if it's like put a +1 counter on it and untap it, a few of those do exist right now in the format. Then you can go a ton of mana off that creature, and then you're scrying meanwhile while drawing cards, possibly even getting other triggers off of casting spells like the Proliferate, the blue Proliferate Mage every time you cast a spell. I don't know. I think there is some legitimacy for actually going down that path in Standard to see if Season of Growth can actually spawn and they stack too, so that's pretty cool with them. You get the stackable scries and the stackable draw cards for every card you cast. Yeah, I think this card has potential, and I'm looking forward to definitely brewing with this one. So on to my number 2. and my number 1. And typically I don't like I'm not a big Planeswalker fan, but for this set there are 2 Planeswalkers in my top 2. The first one being Sorin Imperious Bloodlord. This card is a card I want to brew in Modern. It's 3 mana for a 4 loyalty Planeswalker with a +1 ability to put a +1/+1 counter on a vampire and give a vampire or non-vampire death touch, and lifelink is the +1. So the +1's like pretty meh, but it's a 3 mana walker. It's fine. The other +1 is you can sacrifice a vampire to have Sorin deal 3 damage to any target you gain through life. Now that gets a little bit better with an aristocrat type shell. There are some vampire token generators right now in the format that can give you like a renewable resource to keep doing this. I mean, this is a lightning helix every time you sacrifice a vampire, which I think is also pretty decent. And then we have the -3, which I think is just absolutely busted, which is you may put a vampire creature card from your hand onto the battlefield. There are some high converted mana cost vampires in the history of Magic. There is one that came out of New Phyrexia that you can begin the opening, if it's in your opening hand, you lightning helix your opponents, and then with Sorin on turn number 3, you can possibly even get it out on turn number 2 if you're in like a Birds of Paradise type shell with into Sorin, and then you get a 6/6 Death Touch Lifelinker out on turn number 2. Even on turn number 3, that's pretty decent in Modern, depending on the meta. Like what is Arclight Phoenix deck's going to do against that? It's going to be too much of a life gain swing. I guess they have like Thing in the Ice within the blue version, but same thing with like Burn. It's going to be backbreaking for a lot of decks to come back from a 6/6 Lifelinker that survives fatal pushes. It still does die to a few other of the removal spells, but it survives Lightning Bolt and Fatal Push. That's pretty good. So I'm thinking this card is very playable in a vampire shell. It doesn't have to be that particular vampire, but I think that's a good one. With a very high mana cost of 7, it's very, very tough to get any sort of reasonable use out of it, but Sorin cheating it into play and having it drain your opponent on turn number 1, yeah, seems pretty decent. All right, on to my number 1, and this is another card that might get me back into Modern. If you know anything about me, I've been pretty negative about Modern for some time, but I still have a special place in my heart for Soul Sisters in Modern because of the fun times I had with that deck and the Pro Tour invite. And I think this is finally a Planeswalker that works in Soul Sisters, and is a card that might actually make Soul Sisters more of a tier deck. And this is a Johnny Strength of Pride. One of the problems with Soul Sisters is it doesn't have any decent control elements to it. Like, it's very good against attrition decks, and it's very good against the aggro decks, but it struggles against combo, and it struggles against decks that go over the top of it. In the past, I've had to put in like Wrath of God type effects, especially I remember when Merfolk was big and Elves were big. That was like a necessary evil to put Wrath of God, but it was a feel bad card because I had to destroy my own cards. A Johnny Strength of Pride solves the problem. So the +1 is you gain life equal to the number of creatures you control, plus the number of Planeswalkers you control, so you're at least gaining 1 life with the Johnny, which isn't very good. It's pretty bad, in fact. And the -2 is you create a 2/2 white cat soldier creature token named a Johnny's Pridemate, so it gives you a renewable a Johnny's Pridemate. It almost feels like a Ranger of Eos here, because you're getting 2 for 1 card out of Ranger of Eos going to get 2 1-drops. This is basically getting you 2 2-drops with the -2s, and a Johnny's Pridemate is for some of the best cards in Soul Sisters. But where this really shines is the 0, and might bring back the Squadron Hawk and the Martyr of Sands list that I used to run, which is if you have 15 more life than your starting life total, you can exile a Johnny Strength of Pride and each artifact and creatures your opponents control. Artifacts are pretty big in Modern right now. Creatures are still pretty big in Modern, and the exile is very relevant versus like Phoenix decks versus Dredge decks. They're gone. All you have to have is that 35 life. On turn number 4, this is perfect against those particular decks. Even the kind of the Bridge from of Below decks, they're gone. You don't have to ever deal with them again. With a 0 ability, a Johnny still sticks around. You don't have to even kill your Johnny. In fact, you can continue. Oh no, you do have to kill your own. I'll read that. You do have to exile a Johnny, Strength of Pride. But as a 0, you don't have to you don't have to set up a Johnny. It's just cast it, exile, wipe your opponent's board, your board's fine, and have the upside of getting rid of artifacts. So again, artifacts are good. Still in the format. There's still Hardened Scales Affinity and Affinity. There's still Lantern Control decks. There's still various Karn-based decks that utilize artifacts. And a Johnny Strength of Pride is a card that I think comes out perfect on turn number 4, which is the very pivotal turn for Soul Sister to beat some of these decks that go over the top of it. And yeah, I think it's the perfect card. It does everything it wants to do for Soul Sisters, and I'm looking forward to slotting this in the deck. So that's my top 10 list of cards from the Core set 2020. This set ended up being a pretty decent set. I could have probably gone another 5 cards of cards that I'm looking forward to brew around. Let's just go down the list one more time. We have Omnath Locus of the Royal for Elemental Tribal. We have Yarick the Desecrated for the Panharmonicon on a creature. Mystic Forge for many degenerate artifact decks. Kaikar Wind's Fury for a spells-based go-wide strategy. Risen Reef for Elemental Tribal. Corpse Knight for an Aristocrats or go-wide type strategy. Lay on Abundance for kind of Elf Ball or other Mana Dork type abilities. Season of Growth for a green heroic type strategy. Yeah, there's a lot of potential with this card. Sorin Imperious Bloodlord, I think Vampire Tribal in Modern could actually be pushed because of this card, because of being able to ramp out a Vampire as quick as turn number 2 or 3. And a Johnny Strength of Pride for Soul Sisters, getting a very, very good new card for Modern. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this list of cards that I want to brew around from Core Set 2020. Be looking forward to these brews. I'll try to slap one out every Tuesday for Tuesday Brews Day. We'll bring it back. We'll probably throw some articles up on Rogue Deck Builder and get this going again. Be looking for the Brew channel probably sometime in the fall. I don't want it to just be my channel. I want to start recruiting other people from, like I said, other walks of life in the Magic the Gathering community that want to brew more Rogue decks. We'll whole channel. Hopefully we can get a different personality doing one per week, and then we can fill up a 7-day week of brews, so you can get your daily brews in, and we can get back to kind of the spirit of where this channel started. I know I haven't done a lot of brews in the past couple of years, been very busy with the store, very busy with the market channel and whatnot, and brews have had to take a backseat, but I want to start playing again. Still playing my arena dailies and making sure I stockpile on the arena gold so I can actually afford these cards and whatnot, so we should be good to go here in the near future. Hope you enjoyed this list. Kevin with Rogue Deck Builder. Thanks for watching.